Sarah Chen pushed her cart down the grocery store aisle, her 3-year-old daughter Emma chattering excitedly about the colorful cereal boxes they passed. To everyone around them, Sarah looked like any other young mother in suburban Phoenix: tired eyes, messy ponytail, wearing jeans with small handprints on them and a faded college t-shirt. The other shoppers barely glanced her way as she navigated around them, apologizing softly when Emma reached for items on the shelves.
"Mommy, can we get the one with the tiger?" Emma asked, pointing at a bright orange box.
Sarah smiled and ruffled her daughter's dark hair.
"Maybe next time, sweetheart.
We need to stick to our list today." The truth was, money was tight. It had been ever since her husband David died in a car accident 18 months ago, leaving Sarah to raise Emma alone on her teacher's salary. She had taken a job at Roosevelt Elementary, teaching 2nd grade, because the hours worked well with Emma's schedule and the summers off meant she could spend time with her daughter.
Nobody at the school knew about her past life.
Nobody knew that before Emma was born, before she met David, Sarah had been Captain Sarah Chen of the United States Air Force. As they moved through the produce section, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watching the news about Luke Air Force Base.
"Scary stuff happening. Glad you're safe at home with Emma." Sarah's stomach dropped.
She quickly pulled up a news app while Emma played with a small toy plane in the cart, a gift from David that she carried everywhere. The headline made Sarah's blood run cold: "Emergency at Luke Air Force Base, multiple aircraft down, search and rescue operations underway." The article was brief but alarming. A severe weather system had moved through the area unexpectedly, catching several training flights off guard. 2 F-22 Raptors had gone down in the desert, and weather conditions were making rescue operations nearly impossible. Regular helicopter and ground crews couldn't reach the crash sites due to dangerous wind conditions and electrical storms.
Sarah's hands trembled as she read the details.
She knew that base well; she had trained there years ago. More importantly, she knew the terrain where the aircraft had crashed.
The remote desert area northeast of the base was treacherous even in good conditions.
In a storm like this, with high winds and limited visibility, it would be a death trap for conventional rescue operations. "Mommy, you look scared," Emma said, looking up at her with concerned brown eyes that reminded Sarah so much of David.
"I'm okay, baby," Sarah said, forcing a smile.
But her mind was racing. She thought about the pilots who might be injured and stranded in that desert.
She thought about their families, waiting desperately for news.
She thought about her own years of training, the countless hours she had spent mastering every inch of an F-22's capabilities.
Sarah Chen hadn't flown a fighter jet in over 4 years.
After Emma was born, she had made the difficult decision to leave active duty. David's job in Phoenix had been stable, and they wanted to give their daughter a normal childhood. Sarah had convinced herself she was done with that life. She had packed away her flight suit, her medals, her memories of soaring through clouds at twice the speed of sound. But, as she stood in that grocery store, reading about pilots who might die if help didn't reach them soon, Sarah felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It was the same feeling she used to get before a challenging mission, a mix of fear, determination, and absolute certainty about what needed to be done. Emma continued playing with her toy plane, making soft whooshing sounds as she flew it around the cart. The little girl had no idea that her mother had once been one of the most skilled F-22 pilots in the entire Air Force. Sarah had never told her those stories. In Emma's world, Mommy was just Mommy, the woman who made pancakes on Saturday mornings, who read bedtime stories in funny voices, who worked at the school and always smelled like chalk and hand sanitizer.
Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert: Luke AFB confirms, 2 pilots missing after emergency ejection, weather conditions deteriorating. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her last flight in an F-22. It had been a perfect autumn day, crystal clear skies stretching endlessly in every direction. She had pushed the aircraft to its limits, dancing through the air with a precision that had taken years to develop. Her commander had called her a natural, said she had an instinct for flying that couldn't be taught. But natural talent meant nothing if you didn't use it. "Excuse me, ma'am?"
Sarah looked up to find a young store employee standing beside her cart.
"Are you all right? You've been standing here for a while."
"Yes, I'm fine," Sarah said quickly.
"Just checking something on my phone."
But she wasn't fine. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to act. She knew the capabilities of an F-22 in severe weather better than almost anyone.
She knew how to navigate through the kind of storm that was grounding other aircraft. And she knew that every minute those pilots spent in the desert reduced their chances of survival. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was now having an animated conversation with her toy plane. Her daughter trusted her completely, depended on her for everything. How could she even think about leaving Emma to rush into danger? She was a mother now, not a fighter pilot. Her responsibilities had changed. But then, she thought about other mothers, other children, waiting by phones for news about their loved ones. She thought about the wives and husbands and parents of the missing pilots, praying for a miracle that might never come because no one else could reach them in time. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Emma, sweetie, we need to go see Mrs. Patterson," she said, abandoning their cart and scooping her daughter up. "But we didn't finish shopping," Emma protested. "I know, baby. Something very important came up. Remember how Mommy always tells you about helping people when they're in trouble?" Emma nodded solemnly. She was a smart child, and she could sense the urgency in her mother's voice. As they walked quickly toward the exit, Sarah was already planning. Mrs. Patterson had watched Emma before and would do it again without question. Sarah's car had enough gas to get to Luke Air Force Base. The bigger challenge would be convincing anyone there to listen to her. She thought about how she would explain herself. "Hi, I'm Sarah Chen, elementary school teacher and single mom, but I used to be one of your best F-22 pilots and I think I can save those missing airmen." It sounded crazy even to her. But, crazy or not, she had to try. The drive to Mrs. Patterson's house took 15 minutes, during which Sarah tried to explain to Emma why she might need to go away for a little while. Emma didn't understand completely, but she accepted that sometimes grown-ups had to do important things to help other people. Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who had become like a grandmother to Emma, took one look at Sarah's face and immediately agreed to watch the little girl without asking questions. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "Promise?" Emma asked. "I promise," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was a promise she could keep. As she drove toward Luke Air Force Base, Sarah's mind switched into a mode she hadn't accessed in years. She began running through pre-flight checklists, calculating weather patterns, reviewing everything she knew about the terrain where the pilots had gone down. The scared elementary school teacher faded away, replaced by the confident fighter pilot who had once been considered among the Air Force's elite. The base came into view just as the sun was setting, its lights cutting through the growing darkness. Sarah could see the unusual activity even from the main gate, extra vehicles, personnel moving with urgent purpose, the distinctive outline of search and rescue helicopters grounded due to the weather. She pulled up to the security checkpoint, her heart pounding. The young airman who approached her window looked tired and stressed. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the base is restricted right now due to the emergency situation." "Only authorized personnel. I need to speak with your commanding officer," Sarah interrupted. "Tell them Captain Sarah Chen is here about the missing F-22 pilots." The airman looked skeptical. Sarah didn't blame him. In her civilian clothes, with her hair still in a messy ponytail from grocery shopping, she didn't look like someone who should be taken seriously in a military emergency. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, and I'm not sure, Airman," Sarah said, her voice taking on the commanding tone she hadn't used in years. "2 pilots are missing in a storm that's only getting worse. Every minute we waste talking is a minute closer to those men dying. Get your CO on the radio right now and tell them that the pilot who set the base speed record in 2019 is here and ready to fly." Something in her voice, some unmistakable authority that came from years of military training, made the airman straighten up. He reached for his radio. As Sarah waited, she looked up at the stormy sky and made a silent promise to Emma, to David's memory, and to the missing pilots somewhere out there in the darkness. She was about to step back into a world she had left behind, but she was no longer the same person who had walked away from it. She was stronger now, with more to lose and more reason to succeed. The airman's radio crackled to life, and Sarah heard the words that would change everything, send her through. Colonel Marcus Webb was having the worst day of his career. He stood in the emergency command center at Luke Air Force Base, watching weather radar that showed conditions getting worse by the hour. 2 of his pilots were somewhere in that storm, and every conventional rescue option had been exhausted or deemed too dangerous to attempt. "Sir, there's a woman at the gate claiming to be a former F-22 pilot," his aide reported. "She says she set the base speed record in 2019.
Webb looked up from the radar display, his jaw tight with stress.
What's her name? Sarah Chen, sir. Claims to be a captain. Webb's expression changed completely. He knew that name. Everyone in the F-22 program knew that name.
Captain Sarah Chen had been a legend before she disappeared from active duty without explanation. Her flying skills were talked about in hushed, reverent tones among pilots who respected few people.
Bring her here immediately, Webb ordered. 10 minutes later, Sarah walked into the command center wearing jeans and sneakers, looking completely out of place among the uniformed personnel rushing around with urgent purpose.
But, when she approached the radar displays and began studying the weather patterns, something in her posture shifted.
Webb watched as the civilian woman transformed into someone else entirely.
Captain Chen, he said, extending his hand.
I remember reading your file. What are you doing in Phoenix? Teaching elementary school, sir, Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly.
I saw the news about the missing pilots. I know this terrain, and I know what an F-22 can handle in severe weather conditions.
Webb studied her for a moment.
You've been out of active duty for 4 years. No recent flight time, no current certifications. I can't authorize, with respect, Colonel, Sarah interrupted, I don't think you have many other options right now.
She was right, and they both knew it.
Webb had spent the last 3 hours watching his rescue teams get turned back by weather that made helicopter operations impossible. The missing pilots had ejected somewhere in a 60-square-mile area of desert that was being hammered by winds exceeding 70 miles per hour and electrical storms that made radio communication sporadic at best. Show me what you're thinking, Webb said, stepping aside to give her access to the tactical displays. Sarah immediately began working with the digital mapping system, her fingers moving across the touchscreen with practiced efficiency. The ejection coordinates put them somewhere in this area, she said, highlighting a section of the map. But, given the wind patterns at the time they went down, they could have drifted significantly during descent. She pulled up additional weather data, overlaying wind speed and direction information from the time of the incident. If I were flying search patterns in these conditions, I would start here, she indicated a point on the map, and work in expanding spirals. The F-22's weather radar can penetrate this storm in ways that ground-based systems can't. The winds are gusting over 70, Webb pointed out.
Even for an F-22, that's pushing the envelope.
Yes, sir, it is, Sarah agreed. But, I've flown in worse.
Remember the training exercise in Alaska 3 winters ago?
100-mile-per-hour crosswinds, zero visibility, simulated combat conditions. I logged more hours in severe weather than anyone else in my squadron.
Webb did remember reading about that exercise.
Several pilots had been unable to complete the mission due to the extreme conditions, but Chen had not only completed it successfully, she had done so while helping guide other aircraft to safety. Even if I authorize this, Webb said slowly, we only have one F-22 available right now that's fully mission-ready. If something happens to you out there, I'll have lost 3 pilots instead of 2.
Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. Colonel, I have a 3-year-old daughter at home. Trust me when I say I have every intention of coming back.
But, right now, 2 people are dying in that desert, and I'm the only person who can reach them. The confidence in her voice was absolute, but Webb could see something else in her expression, the weight of a mother making an impossible choice between her child's safety and her duty to save others.
What about flight gear? You can't fly in civilian clothes. I'm sure someone here is about my size, Sarah said.
And I remember every switch, every system, every emergency procedure for the F-22.
Muscle memory doesn't just disappear.
Webb was quiet for a long moment, studying the weather data and the search area. His communications officer looked up from his station and shook his head, still no radio contact with the missing pilots, and ground teams remained unable to advance due to the storm conditions. Get her a flight suit and helmet, Webb finally ordered. And prep Raptor 7 for immediate launch.
As personnel scrambled to prepare equipment for Sarah, Webb pulled her aside. Chen, I need to ask you something directly. Are you absolutely certain you can handle this aircraft in these conditions?
I'm not questioning your past abilities, but you've been out of the cockpit for 4 years.
You have a child depending on you.
If you have any doubt whatsoever, sir, I appreciate your concern, Sarah replied.
But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Those pilots have families too. They have people who love them, people who are praying for them to come home. I can't save everyone, but I can save them." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood on the tarmac beside the sleek, angular form of an F-22 Raptor. The storm was clearly visible in the distance, a wall of dark clouds lit from within by constant lightning. The wind was already strong enough that ground crews had to lean into it to work. The flight suit fit reasonably well, though it felt strange after so many years of civilian clothes. As Sarah ran through her pre-flight inspection, her hands moved automatically to check each system, each connection, each potential point of failure. It was like riding a bicycle. The knowledge was still there, embedded so deeply that her conscious mind barely needed to direct the process. "Ma'am," called Senior Airman Rodriguez, one of the ground crew members helping with the preparation. "I just wanted to say, my brother is one of the missing pilots. Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez. Thank you for doing this." Sarah paused in her inspection and looked at the young airman. He couldn't have been more than 22, and his eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that she recognized immediately. It was the same expression she had seen in the mirror 18 months ago, when she was waiting for news about David after his accident. "What's your brother like?" Sarah asked. "He's a good pilot, ma'am. Really good. And he's smart about survival stuff. If anyone can stay alive out there until help arrives, it's Miguel. He's got a baby on the way, first kid. He's been talking about it for months." Sarah felt her resolve strengthen even further. "I'm going to bring him home," she said simply. "I'm going to bring them both home." As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah felt a profound shift occurring within her. The worried elementary school teacher, the grieving widow, the overwhelmed single mother, all of those parts of her were still there, but they stepped aside to make room for the person she had once been. Captain Sarah Chen settled into the pilot's seat like she was coming home. The cockpit of the F-22 was exactly as she remembered, every display, every control, every switch in precisely the location her muscle memory expected. She began the startup sequence, her hands moving through the checklist with automatic precision while her mind focused on the mission ahead. "Raptor 7, you are cleared for emergency takeoff," came the voice from the control tower. "Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Recommend maximum safe speed to target area." "Raptor 7 copies," Sarah replied into her helmet microphone. "Beginning takeoff sequence." As the massive engine spooled up to full power, Sarah thought briefly about Emma, safe at Mrs. Patterson's house, probably eating dinner and watching cartoons. Her daughter had no idea that Mommy was about to fly into one of the most dangerous storms in recent Arizona history. With luck, she never would need to know. The F-22 accelerated down the runway, and Sarah felt the familiar rush of G-forces pressing her back into her seat. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing rapidly into the turbulent air. Almost immediately, they were buffeted by severe wind shear, but Sarah's hands on the controls remained steady and sure. "Tower, Raptor 7 is airborne and proceeding to search area," she reported. "Switching to search frequency." "Good hunting, Raptor 7, came the reply. "Bring our people home." As the lights of the base fell away behind her, Sarah flew directly toward the wall of the storm, her aircraft's advanced radar already beginning to penetrate the chaotic weather patterns ahead. Somewhere in that maelstrom of wind and lightning, two pilots were fighting for their lives. Sarah had made a promise to a young airman, to a colonel, to herself, and to the memory of her husband who had always encouraged her to help others. She was going to keep that promise, no matter what it cost her. The storm swallowed the F-22, and Sarah Chen disappeared into the night, carrying with her the hopes of everyone who loved the missing pilots and the quiet strength of a mother who refused to let anyone else's children become orphans. The storm hit Sarah's F-22 like a living thing trying to tear the aircraft apart. Lightning illuminated the cockpit in brief, brilliant flashes while thunder rolled through the airframe with enough force to rattle her teeth. The wind shear was unlike anything she had experienced, throwing the fighter jet around like a toy despite its advanced flight control systems. Sarah's hands gripped the stick firmly but not rigidly, making constant micro-adjustments to keep the aircraft stable. Years of training in extreme weather conditions had taught her that fighting the storm was useless. She had to work with it, find the pockets of calmer air, and use the aircraft's superior technology to navigate through conditions that would destroy lesser planes. "This is Raptor 7 beginning search pattern Alpha," she radioed to the base, though she wasn't sure if her transmission was getting through the electrical interference. The F-22's advanced radar system was her primary tool in the chaotic darkness. Unlike ground-based systems that were being disrupted by the storm, the aircraft's AESA radar could punch through the weather and give her detailed information about the terrain below.
Sarah configured it for ground mapping mode and began her search pattern, starting from the last known position of the missing pilots. The landscape below was a nightmare of wind-carved desert punctuated by deep arroyos and rocky outcroppings. In good weather, it would be challenging terrain for a search and rescue operation. In this storm, it was nearly impossible to distinguish natural features from debris or survival signals. Sarah had been searching for 40 minutes when her radar picked up something unusual, a metallic signature that didn't match the natural geology of the area. She banked the aircraft sharply to the left, fighting against a powerful crosswind that tried to push her off course. Possible wreckage located, she reported, though she could barely hear her own voice over the storm noise filling her helmet. Investigating coordinates 37.21 north, 112.45 west. As she descended to get a better look, the turbulence became even more severe. The F-22 bounced and shuddered through the air like a roller coaster, but Sarah maintained precise control. Through brief breaks in the cloud cover, illuminated by lightning strikes, she caught glimpses of twisted metal scattered across a wide area. It was definitely aircraft wreckage, but she couldn't immediately determine if anyone had survived the crash. Sarah activated the aircraft's sophisticated camera systems, using infrared imaging to scan for heat signatures that might indicate survivors. The technology was designed for combat reconnaissance, but it worked just as well for search and rescue operations. She flew slow, methodical passes over the crash site, fighting the storm with every maneuver. Then, she saw it, a faint heat signature about 200 yards from the main wreckage site. It was partially sheltered behind a large rock formation, and the thermal pattern suggested at least one person, possibly two, huddled together for protection from the wind and rain. Sarah's heart leaped with hope, but she knew that spotting the survivors was only the beginning of her problems. The terrain around their location was extremely rough, with no suitable landing areas for any aircraft, let alone an F-22. Even if she could land safely, the fighter jet wasn't equipped for passenger transport. She circled the area again, this time using the aircraft's radio beacon to try to make contact with the survivors. "This is Captain Chan in an F-22 Raptor. If you can hear this transmission, please respond on emergency frequency 243.0. For several minutes, there was only static filled with the electrical noise of the storm. Then, faintly, she heard a voice, "F-22, this is Lieutenant Rodriguez. I'm alive but injured. Lieutenant Patterson is with me but unconscious. We need immediate medical evacuation." Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes. "Rodriguez, this is Sarah Chan. I'm here to get you home to your family. What's your condition?" "Broken leg, possible concussion, but I'm functional," Rodriguez replied, his voice weak but steady. "Patterson took a harder hit during ejection. He needs a hospital soon." "Understood. I'm going to coordinate your rescue, but I need you to stay exactly where you are. The storm should start breaking up in the next hour, and we'll have helicopters to you as soon as it's safe." But even as Sarah said those words, she was looking at updated weather data on her displays. The storm wasn't weakening, if anything, it was intensifying. The meteorological reports suggested that helicopter operations would remain impossible for at least 4 to 6 hours, possibly longer. Sarah switched to the command frequency to update Colonel Webb. "Base, this is Raptor 7. I've located both pilots. One is conscious with moderate injuries, the other is unconscious and may need immediate medical attention. Current weather conditions still prohibit helicopter rescue." Webb's voice came through the static. "Copy that, Raptor 7. Outstanding work. Return to base and we'll reassess options once you're safely on the ground." Sarah looked down at the heat signatures below, two tiny spots of warmth in a vast landscape of wind and darkness. In her mind, she could see Rodriguez down there, probably scared and in pain, trying to take care of his unconscious wingman while wondering if his own child would grow up without a father. She thought about the young airman who had thanked her, about the faith everyone had placed in her to bring these men home. "Negative, base," Sarah heard herself saying. "I'm not leaving them. Raptor 7, you've done your job. You've located the survivors. There's nothing more you can do until weather conditions improve." "Sir, Lieutenant Patterson may not have 4 hours. And even if he does, there's no guarantee the storm won't get worse before it gets better. These men need help now." There was a long pause before Webb's voice came back, tense with concern. "Chen, what exactly are you proposing?" Sarah was already studying her options, her mind working through a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The F-22 carried emergency equipment including a survival kit, medical supplies, and a beacon transmitter far more powerful than anything the stranded pilots would have. More importantly, she was trained in emergency medical procedures and survival techniques. "I'm going to eject over their position and provide ground support until rescue arrives," Sarah announced.
"Absolutely not."
Webb's voice cut through the static with sharp authority.
"Captain Chen, you are not authorized to abandon that aircraft.
The F-22 is worth over $150 million, and, more importantly, if you eject in these conditions, you'll just give us 3 people to rescue instead of 2. Colonel, with respect, that F-22 isn't going to save Lieutenant Patterson's life."
"I might be able to."
Sarah was already beginning emergency shutdown procedures for the aircraft's non-essential systems, preserving battery power for the crucial final minutes. The F-22's ejection seat was designed to function in exactly these kinds of extreme weather conditions, and her survival training had covered desert scenarios extensively.
"Chen, I'm ordering you to return to base immediately."
"Sir, I'm sorry, but I can't follow that order," Sarah replied calmly.
"My oath as an officer requires me to take any action necessary to save the lives of fellow service members.
Rodriguez has a baby on the way, and Patterson has a family who loves him. I'm not going to let them die because I was too afraid to take a calculated risk." She thought about Emma again, safe and warm at Mrs. Patterson's house. Her daughter would be heartbroken if something happened to her mother, but Sarah knew that Emma would understand when she was older. She would understand that sometimes people had to make hard choices to help others. "This is Raptor 7 beginning emergency ejection sequence," Sarah announced, her hand moving to the yellow and black striped ejection handle between her knees.
"Chen, don't do this."
Webb's voice was desperate now.
"Think about your daughter."
"I am thinking about her, sir," Sarah replied softly. "I'm thinking about the kind of mother I want to be, and the kind of world I want her to grow up in. A world where people don't abandon each other when things get difficult." Below her, Lieutenant Rodriguez was probably wondering if the F-22 circling overhead meant rescue was coming, or if it was just going to disappear back into the storm and leave them to die.
Sarah wasn't going to let that happen. "Rodriguez, this is Captain Chen.
I'm coming down to help you and Patterson. Stay where you are and prepare for company." She pulled the ejection handle. The explosive bolts fired with a sound like thunder, and the canopy disappeared into the storm. A fraction of a second later, rocket motors ignited beneath Sarah's seat, launching her up and out of the F-22 at tremendous speed. The wind hit her like a physical blow, spinning her through the chaotic air as her parachute deployed automatically. Behind her, the unmanned F-22 continued flying on autopilot, its sophisticated systems keeping it stable until it would eventually run out of fuel and crash safely in an uninhabited area of the desert, far from any population centers. Sarah descended through the storm, fighting to control her parachute in the brutal wind conditions. Lightning illuminated the ground rushing up toward her, and she could see the rock formation where the 2 pilots were sheltering. She was going to miss it by at least 50 yards, but, in these conditions, that was close enough. She hit the ground hard, her parachute immediately filling with wind and trying to drag her across the rocky desert floor. Sarah triggered the quick-release mechanism and rolled to absorb the impact, her body reacting with trained reflexes despite the years away from active duty. As she struggled to her feet in the howling wind and driving rain, Sarah could see a light bobbing toward her, Rodriguez, using a small flashlight to guide her to their shelter. She gathered her survival equipment and ran toward him, bent against the force of the storm. The reunion was brief but intense. Rodriguez looked terrible, pale, obviously in pain, with one leg bent at an unnatural angle, but he was alert and functional. Lieutenant Patterson was worse, unconscious with what appeared to be a serious head injury.
"How long has he been out?"
Sarah shouted over the wind as she knelt beside Patterson and began checking his vital signs.
"Since we hit the ground," Rodriguez replied. "Maybe 3 hours."
He was talking at first, but then he just stopped. Sarah opened her survival kit and pulled out emergency medical supplies. Patterson's pulse was weak but steady, and his breathing seemed regular. The head injury looked serious but not immediately life-threatening. What worried her more was his core body temperature. In the cold rain and wind, hypothermia was becoming a real danger for an unconscious person. "We need to get him warmer and drier," Sarah said, pulling out an emergency shelter from her kit.
Help me set this up.
Working together despite Rodriguez's broken leg, they managed to erect a small emergency shelter that provided some protection from the wind and rain. Sarah used chemical heat packs from her survival kit to warm Patterson and covered him with emergency blankets designed to retain body heat.
As they worked, Rodriguez kept looking at her with amazement. "Ma'am, I have to ask, who are you?"
"I mean, I know you said you're Captain Chen, but fighter pilots don't usually jump out of perfectly good airplanes to help people."
Sarah smiled grimly as she checked Patterson's pulse again.
"I'm just a mom who used to know how to fly," she said. "And, right now, I'm the person who's going to make sure you both get home to your families." She activated the emergency beacon from her survival kit, sending out a powerful signal that would help rescue teams locate them once the weather cleared. Then, she settled in for what was going to be a long, cold night in the desert, watching over 2 injured pilots and praying that she had made the right choice. The night in the desert stretched endlessly, with Sarah fighting to keep both pilots alive while the storm raged around their makeshift shelter. Every hour brought new challenges. Patterson's condition remained critical, slipping in and out of consciousness, while Rodriguez struggled with pain from his broken leg and the early stages of shock. Sarah drew on every piece of survival training she had ever received, rationing their water supplies, monitoring both men for signs of hypothermia, and using her emergency medical kit to stabilize their injuries as much as possible. She kept them talking when they were conscious, knowing that mental engagement was crucial for preventing both of them from giving up hope. "Tell me about your baby," she said to Rodriguez during one of his more lucid moments.
"When is your wife due?"
6 weeks, Rodriguez replied, his voice weak but filled with emotion.
"We just found out it's a girl. Maria wants to name her Sophia, after her grandmother. I keep thinking about whether I'll get to meet her."
"You will," Sarah said firmly. "Your daughter is going to grow up hearing stories about her brave father who survived against impossible odds. And someday, when she's old enough, I'll tell her how proud I was to serve alongside him."
As dawn approached, the storm finally began to weaken.
The wind dropped from hurricane force to merely dangerous, and the rain lessened from a torrential downpour to a steady drizzle. Sarah's emergency beacon had been transmitting continuously throughout the night, and she knew rescue teams would be mobilizing as soon as conditions permitted helicopter operations. Patterson had regained consciousness several times during the night, though he remained confused and weak. His head injury was definitely serious, but Sarah's assessment suggested he had a good chance of recovery if he could get proper medical treatment soon. The first sign of rescue came at 7:30 a.m., when Sarah heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. She immediately set off a signal flare from her survival kit, sending bright orange smoke rising above their position to guide the rescue team directly to them. The helicopter that appeared over the ridge was a military medical evacuation bird, equipped with a full trauma team and all the equipment needed to stabilize serious injuries.
Sarah had never been happier to see anything in her entire life. The rescue operation was swift and professional.
Within 20 minutes, both pilots were loaded onto stretchers and being treated by military medics while the helicopter prepared for immediate transport to the base hospital. Rodriguez was conscious and stable, asking repeatedly about Patterson's condition and insisting that Sarah be recognized for saving their lives. As they lifted off, Sarah found herself thinking not about the heroic aspects of what she had done, but about Emma. Her daughter had been without her mother for over 12 hours, and Sarah knew the little girl must be confused and frightened. The helicopter ride back to Luke Air Force Base took 40 minutes. During the flight, Sarah watched the medics working on Patterson and felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her decision to eject had made the difference between life and death for both pilots. Patterson's condition had stabilized significantly once they got him warmed up and properly hydrated, and the medical team was optimistic about his recovery. When they landed at the base, Sarah was surprised to find Colonel Webb waiting for her on the tarmac, along with several other senior officers and a crowd of personnel who had heard about the night's dramatic rescue operation. But her attention was immediately drawn to 2 familiar figures standing slightly apart from the military crowd. Mrs. Patterson was there, holding Emma's hand. Her daughter was wearing her favorite purple dress and clutching her toy airplane, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched the helicopter land. Sarah's heart nearly burst with relief and love as she realized that Emma had been brought to witness her mother's safe return.
"Mommy!"
Emma broke free from Mrs. Patterson and ran toward the helicopter as Sarah climbed out. Sarah dropped to her knees and caught her daughter in a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and feeling the solid, warm reality of the most important person in her world.
I'm here, baby. I'm safe. I'm so sorry I had to go away.
Mrs. Patterson said you were helping people, Emma said, pulling back to look at her mother's face.
She said you were being a hero like the people in my storybooks. I was just doing what needed to be done, Sarah replied, smoothing Emma's hair.
Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices to help others. Colonel Webb approached them, his expression a mixture of admiration, exasperation, and official concern.
Captain Chen, we need to debrief what happened out there.
But, first, I want you to know that Lieutenant Rodriguez and Lieutenant Patterson are both stable and expected to make full recoveries. The doctors say Patterson would not have survived another hour without the medical attention you provided.
Sarah stood up, keeping Emma close beside her. I'm glad they're going to be okay, sir. That's all that matters.
What you did last night was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most reckless, Webb continued.
Probably both.
You saved 2 lives at enormous personal risk, but you also destroyed a $150 million aircraft and violated direct orders from a superior officer.
Sarah nodded, understanding that there would be consequences for her actions. I accept full responsibility for my decisions, sir.
I know there will be an investigation and, probably disciplinary action.
I'm prepared for whatever comes next.
Webb studied her for a moment, then smiled slightly.
Actually, Captain, there's been a development you should know about.
About an hour ago, I received a call from General Morrison at Air Combat Command. It seems word of last night's rescue has reached some very high levels, and there's considerable interest in bringing you back to active duty.
Sarah blinked in surprise.
Sir? Specifically, they want to offer you a position training search and rescue pilots in extreme weather operations. It would be based here at Luke, regular hours, excellent benefits, and you'd be developing programs that could save countless lives in the future. Your daughter could stay in the same school district, and you'd be using your skills for exactly the kind of mission you performed last night.
Sarah looked down at Emma, who was listening to the conversation with intense concentration.
Her daughter had always been remarkably perceptive for a 3-year-old, and Sarah could see that she understood this was an important moment.
Would I still get to be with you every day? Emma asked.
Yes, sweetheart. I would work during the day while you're at school, and be home with you every evening and weekend, just like now.
Emma considered this seriously.
And you would help other people like you helped those pilots?
That's right. Emma nodded decisively. I think Daddy would want you to do that.
He always said helping people was the most important thing. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she thought about David and how proud he would have been of the choice she had made. He had always encouraged her to use her talents to make a difference in the world, and he would have understood why she couldn't abandon those pilots in the desert. Colonel, Sarah said, I'd be honored to accept that position. The crowd of personnel who had gathered to welcome the rescue team home burst into spontaneous applause. Sarah realized that word of her actions had spread throughout the base, and people were looking at her with expressions of genuine respect and admiration. Senior Airman Rodriguez, Miguel's brother, pushed through the crowd and approached Sarah.
Ma'am, I just wanted to thank you for bringing my brother home. My family will never forget what you did.
Your brother is a brave pilot and a good man, Sarah replied.
I was honored to serve alongside him.
As the crowd began to disperse, Mrs. Patterson approached with a warm smile. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind that I brought Emma to the base. She was so worried about you, and I thought she should see for herself that you were safe.
Thank you for taking care of her, Sarah said gratefully. And thank you for understanding why I had to go.
My late husband was military, Mrs. Patterson replied.
I know about duty and sacrifice. But I also know about the importance of coming home to the people who love you.
Over the following weeks, as Sarah began her transition back to active duty, the story of the grocery store teacher who had been a secret fighter pilot spread far beyond Luke Air Force Base. News outlets picked up the story, magazines wrote feature articles, and social media celebrated her as an example of everyday heroes who rise to extraordinary challenges when circumstances demand it. But, for Sarah, the most important recognition came from Emma, who began telling everyone at her preschool that her mommy was both a teacher and a pilot who helped people. She carried her toy airplane with even more pride than before, and sometimes Sarah would find her daughter flying missions around the backyard, rescuing her stuffed animals from imaginary dangers.
Lieutenant Rodriguez made a full recovery and returned to active duty, becoming one of the most vocal advocates for Sarah's new training programs.
Lieutenant Patterson took longer to heal from his head injury, but he eventually returned to flying as well. Both pilots remained close friends with Sarah, and their families often gathered for barbecues and holidays.
Rodriguez's daughter, Sophia, was born healthy and beautiful 6 weeks after the rescue.
At the christening ceremony, Rodriguez and his wife asked Sarah to be the baby's godmother, an honor that moved her deeply. "She's named Sophia after my grandmother," Rodriguez explained to the gathered family and friends, "but her middle name is Sarah, after the woman who made sure I would be here to meet my daughter." On quiet evenings at home, when Emma was asleep and the house was peaceful, Sarah sometimes thought about that night in the desert and the choices that had led her there. She had left her old life as a fighter pilot to become a mother and teacher, thinking she was moving away from heroism and adventure. But she had learned that being a hero wasn't about the job you held or the uniform you wore, it was about the choices you made when others needed help. The grocery store where she had first learned about the missing pilots had put up a small plaque near the entrance, reading, "Home base of Captain Sarah Chen, who reminds us that heroes live among us every day." Sarah was embarrassed by the attention, but Emma loved pointing out the plaque to anyone who would listen. Sarah's new job training search and rescue pilots became everything Colonel Webb had promised. She developed innovative programs for extreme weather operations, drawing on her own experiences to prepare other pilots for the kinds of challenges she had faced that stormy night. Her courses became mandatory training for all Air Force rescue personnel, and techniques she developed were credited with saving dozens of lives in subsequent operations around the world. But, perhaps more importantly, Sarah had found a way to honor both sides of her identity: the dedicated mother who would do anything for her child, and the skilled pilot who couldn't ignore others in need. She no longer had to choose between those parts of herself, because she had learned they were both essential aspects of who she was meant to be. Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, Sarah received cards and messages from Rodriguez, Patterson, their families, and many of the pilots she had trained. The notes always said the same thing in different ways: "Thank you for showing us what courage really looks like." But the message that meant the most to Sarah came from Emma on her 5th birthday, when she drew a picture of her mother standing beside an F-22 with the words, "My mommy helps people," written in careful kindergarten letters across the top. Sarah kept that drawing on her desk at work, where it served as a daily reminder that the most important audience for her choices would always be the little girl who called her mommy, and who was learning through her mother's example that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when love and duty called them to action.